One thing that I said to you all the way through the Voice debate a couple of years ago, and I stand by, is that the media was always going to come for Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. Now, you know how much we love the Senator. You know how regularly she appears on the program. The expectation is she will do so again for us this week, commitments pending. But of course, the vast bulk of the establishment of Australia who was against her position, who believed that we needed to change the Constitution, that we needed to have the voice to Parliament, has always had it in for her. She will be placed alongside several other centre-right Australian politicians as ones who they will attempt to turn into someone who cannot be heard on any issue, because on the issues that they vehemently disagree with the left-wing establishment, well, that of course disqualifies them from the game. None of this is new, but the reason I start with this evening is because of the behaviour that played out today as an example of this. The Insiders program over on Channel 2 is, of course, a multi-decade institution and a temperature check on whatever the media establishment thinks is up and down on any given issue. Now, it's always, generally speaking, 2 to 3 to the left, or more often than not, it ends up being sort of 3 that are to the left. But I want to talk about that reporter in particular, who I believe works for the ABC. Because when she was speaking about the comments that, again, no one can actually remember word from a couple of weeks ago, and that I have no plans to introduce into a third week of news coverage, she had this to say, and therefore also wiping Jacinta Nampijinpa Price from the national debate.
They were discriminatory, they were racist. It shows that she is a relatively inexperienced politician who sort of has one mode, that she's able to go in and destroy an idea, which we saw very much with the Voice referendum. But when it comes to selling a vision or talking about complicated or nuanced policy areas, she's not really able to do that yet.
So let's decode at least the last 2 sentences of what that person had to say. Racist, but also dumb. Does anyone who has seen any interviews ever with Jacinta Nampijinpa Price would conclude that she is anything other than a smart and accomplished person, a person who should be in the Australian national debate, one that you can agree with every word, you can disagree with every word, or like most people, you'll be somewhere in the middle, but you recognise that this is a passionate person who does know what they're talking about. But because she was part of a movement which denied the pearl clutchers and the establishment what they considered to be the historic way to deal with the problems that they so often don't talk about, she will forever have to pay the price of their anger. Did you also notice that no one interrupted? No one jumped in. No one sincerely pushed back. Now, I've got to say, there are plenty of people who I vehemently disagree with in Australian politics, and there are very few that I would go anywhere close to saying are dumb. But the reality is that there are people who are going to frustrate you. There are people who are going to say things that you may think are not the right thing for the country. But to go as close as that reporter did, and in fact, can we cue it up again, play it again? Do you see what I see in what this lady said? Firstly, the racist stuff, but then a divisive figure. Remember the Tony Abbott, he's the most divisive figure of our age. Again, if you stand in the way of what the establishment left want, as opposed to saving them from themselves, or in a democracy, and remember, it's a democracy, it was the Australian people who ultimately made a decision in every single state in the country. The only exception is the bubble in which that program, of course, is produced, the ACT, that voted no. Even in Victoria, which is going to get a voice anyway, a clear majority of people didn't say no, they said hell no. But from the Canberra bubble perspective, there was no vote. There is no democracy. There just was racism and a person who's great at tearing things down, who's not smart enough to articulate the things that they believe in. This is extraordinary that this went to air today.
They were discriminatory, they were racist. It shows that she is a relatively inexperienced politician who sort of has one mode, that she's able to go in and destroy an idea, which we saw very much with the Voice referendum. But when it comes to selling a vision or talking about complicated or nuanced policy areas, she's not really able to do that yet.
Extraordinary. Can you know what you think about that or anything else? paul@skynews.com.au. But it wasn't the only attempt to put the Yes Now backbencher, but this prominent Australian voice into the corner, to push her out towards the extremes where no decent reporter is going to engage with and no reasonable Australian citizen should agree with. Not one, but a two-part deep dive into her personal life, into her family life, was up there in the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, I have never read a profile piece or hit job piece of an Australian politician like this in my life. Now, this again is, for all intents and purposes, somebody who now is a backbencher in the Senate in the opposition party, whose more words have been written about her personal and private life via these two articles than you've ever seen read about the Prime Minister, let alone the alternative Prime Minister, let alone former Prime Ministers, let alone the leaders of the Greens or people who currently have a lot more power in the Australian Parliament. It was extraordinary today. Now, again, we look forward to talking to Jacinta Price. The plan is we shall do so next week. Sometimes she comes and goes depending on other things that are happening in her life, but I look forward to talking to her sooner rather than later about, firstly, what was said on the ABC, but secondly, the special treatment she is being singled out for because she helped convince Australia to go from 60% yes to 60% no.